Welcome you all to the course on Gender Studies. This is the 19th episode in the series. Let me tell you the three objectives that I have framed for this episode on Margaret Atwood's The Edible Woman. The first objective is to understand the significance of the title. The second objective is to comprehend the relationship between sexuality and food as depicted in the novel. The third and final objective is to make the students ponder over the gender identity and social representation of gender. Let us know something about the author. Margaret E. Atwood is born in Ottawa, Canada in 1939. She is a living writer and she has spent most of her early years in the wilderness and area of northern Quebec. In fact, she lived with her family in a log cabin that had no electricity, no running water, and no television or radio. Therefore, the isolation helped her to entertain herself by reading books. She read the popular writers like Edgar Allan Poe and the most popular writers of the 19th century. So, after 2 years at graduate school at the dreaded Harvard University, a year of living in a tiny rooming house, working at a market research. She was working at a market research, which she found as more fun, and it also helped her to write her first novel, The Edible Woman, where the protagonist is working as a market researcher. And she has also written poetry, novels, short stories, children's stories, and a radio play, even a play for television. And she is widely known as a champion of Canadian literature. So, with this introduction to the author, let us get into the story or summary of the story. After that, we will do our analysis in the next episode. So here I confine with the narration of the story itself. Let me do the analysis in the next episode. So The Edible Woman is the first novel by Margaret Atwood, a Canadian author. It was published in 1969. It tells the story of a young woman who struggles with society and her fiancé and food. So it's a three-way struggle with society, her fiancé and food. It is often discussed as an early work of feminism, as Atwood herself calls this a proto-feminist work. That is, it is a beginning to announce what is feminism. It conveys a fundamental idea towards what is feminism. So the three pairs are very much important before the narration of the story or plot. The protagonist is Marianne McAlpin. So Marianne is the protagonist, and the two characters or the two male members who are related to Marianne are Peter and Duncan. She initially falls in love with Peter and even engages with Peter and finally decides to marry Peter. And in the second part, she tries to come out of this engagement. There rises the dilemma or tension in the novel. And she is introduced to a new guy called Duncan, a graduate, and how she moves with him in a friendly manner and later understands or tries to get her identity through Duncan. Therefore, these two characters are playing a vital role in the life of Marianne. One is Peter, another one is Duncan. Then another important pair in the novel is Clara and Joe. So Clara is a typical housewife, and Joe, unlike other men, is more considerate towards housewives and their pitiable state. Therefore, these two characters are introduced to us, and obviously Clara is a friend of Marian, and absolutely a different character from Marian. She's a very stereotypical woman, and a traditional woman to run the family, or to move in the course as the family, as the system of family tracks her. Then the third important pair is Ainsley and Len. So Ainsley is a radical woman, unlike the two, Marian and Clara, because Ainsley wants to have a child without marrying anyone. That is, she anticipates for a single motherhood, which is an astonishing or a shocking thing to Marian. So Ainsley is a radical thinker in the novel, and she wants the baby from Len. That is, she wants Len to provide a sperm, and she doesn't want Len to become a father. So she wants to bring up the child without a father, but she wants a child from someone. In fact, to say Len is a sperm provider to Ainsley. So this is the scenario. So Marian, Peter, Duncan, Clara and Joe, Ainsley and Len. So I have almost introduced all the characters to you, and some of the characters are also there other than these characters I have mentioned. So let us get into the story, and in the course of the story you will come to know the rest of the characters as well. So it tells the story of a woman who begins to identify with food. That's why the title reflects the edible woman. So edible woman can be interpreted in many ways. One of the formal interpretation is that a woman is meant for consumption, that is to be eaten in the name of marriage by the patriarchy. Therefore, the ironic idea is that she doesn't want to be the edible woman. Marian is the protagonist, and she stands for the edible woman, and she doesn't want to be called as a woman for the consumption of men. So how does she tackle this problem, and what is the ultimate climax? What is the ultimate resolution she has taken to control her identity, and the rest of the things will be understood at the end of this narration. So it's a story of a woman who begins to identify with food so much that she loses the ability to eat. So the main character, Marian, so the story begins thus. The main character, Marian, works in market research. She is working in a market research and crafting survey questions and sample products. She gets the surveys and the sample products from the society and produce it into the higher officials. And this is what is the nature of her work. She conducts survey and announces the results, or whatever data she has collected will be given to the higher officials. Therefore, they will conduct a market research and inform the same to the manufacturers. So she shares a top floor apartment with Ainsley and dates Peter, a dependable but boring man. So she is living in a very small room where she shares with Ainsley. So another character is introduced to you. So Ainsley and Marian are very different in nature. And she is a very radical woman, and Marian is very typical and stereotypical woman, and a very conventional woman, in fact, to say in the beginning of the novel. So she dates with Peter, a dependable but boring man. Marian moves with Peter, obviously her fiancé, and she has also been engaged to him, and she is in a position to marry Peter. Peter is somewhat a boring man and a dependable person, but a dependable person. She also keeps in touch with the college friend Clara, who is now a constantly pregnant housewife. So let me tell you something about Peter and I. Very anxious man now, because he thinks that almost his friends have all got married and he is the one left unmarried in the crew. Recently he comes to know that a person called a Trigger had got married, and it triggered his life because he has not been married, and the people who are at the age of him or his fellow or friends at the same age have already been married. So he feels inferior and he wants to get married to Marian, and Marian feels it somewhat troubling, yet she doesn't show her trouble towards him, and she agrees that she will find a day to become wife to him. And she also keep in touch with the college friend Clara, who is now a constantly pregnant housewife. And she visits the house of Clara. Clara is known for her typical family life, and when she was studying in her college life, she got married and forced to resign all their ambitions and dreams, and her only dream was to become family, was to become a housewife. So later the dream turned, she can only act as a housewife, and she is living with a person called Joe, and presently she is conceiving her third child. Already she has delivered 2 children, and Marian couldn't imagine the life of Clara because she never wants to be the one. So one day Ainsley declares that she intends to have a child without getting married, and Marian is shocked. But Ainsley claims that fathers are what ruins families these days. So Ainsley wants to have a child without getting married to anybody because she doesn't want the male members to intrude as father. This shocks Marian because Ainsley thinks that fathers are ruining the families. So she sets her sights on Len. So another character, Len. Len is an old classmate of Marian, and Marian has invited Len to a party where she happens to meet, Ainsley happens to meet Len and tried to use him for her cause. So Len, a man who has no interest in having a family at all and is a serial bachelor. So Len is also a womanizer, and he considers women to be consumed, and having the same thought like Ainsley, they agree with each other in terms of their sex. So at work, Marian is given an assignment about new beer. As she gathers responses about the beer, she meets Duncan. So she is working for a survey on a new beer, and the new beer is, as she gathers response about the beer, she meets Duncan, so another character, a graduate student who charms her with his unexpected answers. So there was an interesting talk between Duncan and Marian, and she was very much interested in Duncan and wanted to move with him in a very friendly and amiable manner. And later that evening she goes on a dinner date with Peter and Len. Ainsley arrives dressed in an innocent schoolgirl intending to seduce Len. So later evening a dinner date was arranged, and Peter and Len arrived to the dinner, and Ainsley also happened to come over there. She learns from Marian that Len is also coming to the party, therefore she dressed like an innocent schoolgirl and intending to seduce Len for her purpose of owning a child without getting married. So Marian begins to dissociate from her body as Len recounts a gory rabbit hunt. So Len is talking about hunting expertise that he had done with Peter. Peter was also interested in what Len says, and both are talking about hunting, and it makes Marian somewhat disturbed, and she relates all the incident to her life and find an aversion towards food, and she moves away from the party abruptly, and nobody knows what is the reason behind her abrupt moving from the place. So she is unable to finish her food and runs from the restaurant. Peter chases after her, and since he is unaware of Ainsley's plan, Marian why she wouldn't have behave more like a roommate. He proposes to her by the end of the night, and she finds herself unable to say when she would like to hold the wedding. So Peter chases her in his car and asks Marian to get in. She gets in, and suddenly he proposes to her and finds her unable to say when she would like to hold the wedding. So he is insisting on the wedding. Therefore, she is gradually trying to relate all the food items as if they are eating Marian. So Marian has identified herself with the food. Therefore, whenever someone eats a steak or any other non-vegetarian, she comes to identify the food as if it is none other than herself. So the food is not separated from herself. So Ainsley succeeds in seducing Len when she tells him that she is pregnant. Len confesses his childhood fear of eggs to Marian. Marian is then unable to eat her usual breakfast of the soft-boiled eggs. Subsequently, she loses the ability to eat vegetables and cake. So eggs, vegetables, cakes, these are the things she has started neglecting. So instead of eating all these things, she eats vitamin pills, and she is suffering from the disorder of eating. So because whenever she wants to eat something, she thinks that she is eating herself, her flesh. Her flesh reflects the food. Therefore, she stops eating anything, and Marian decides to throw a party and invites the office virgins, Duncan and some of his friends. Peter tells her to buy a new dress, something less mousy, and she buys a red dress to please him. Before the party, Ainsley does her makeup and the lipsticks and false eyelashes. Duncan is not pleased and leaves the party, but Marian follows. They go to a motel and have unsatisfying sex and then breakfast the next morning. She is unable to eat anything at all. So Marian decides to throw a party, and she invites office virgins, the girls who are working in the office, and Duncan also arrives to the party. Peter tells her to buy a new dress and be glamorous and less mousy. So she buys a red dress and pleases him. Before the party, Ainsley does her makeup. So Ainsley does all the makeup to her. So red lipstick, the thick red lipstick and false eyelashes. That is, herself is totally changed. So when she looks at the mirror, she doesn't identify herself. It is because Peter has told her to be something, come in new dress and be glamorous. Therefore, she decides to dress in a very lascivious manner and having a red lipstick and false eyelashes, which almost concealed her true identity, that is, true face. So she is slowly or gradually losing her own identity because of her. She has merely changed herself for Peter. She comes to understand that herself has been absolutely changed because of the mentality of Peter. So, and she also thinks about how marriage can also almost change herself or identity. So Marian realizes that Peter is metaphorically consuming her. So at a point of time, she comes to know that Peter is metaphorically consuming her. So here comes the concept of edible woman. So she is eaten, not literally eaten, but metaphorically consumed by Peter's ideology, that is male ideology of marriage. So he has been forcing her, he has been continuously asking her questions when she is going to get married to him, and he is also insisting her to change her way of dressing and outer appearance, external appearance, and she has also lost her taste for food, and she is a food lover. She eats much food, but now she has lost her taste for food, and she is not eating her favorite foods as well. Everything has become upside down in her life. She starts hating the food because she thinks that she is not consuming the food, but she is consuming her flesh, her own flesh. And whenever she comes across Peter eating something, she thinks that he is not eating a food, a steak or something else, but he is eating her bone. He is eating her blood. He is eating her flesh. Therefore, she is living under this conception. She feels that after the marriage, she will cease to exist. And at a point of time, she thinks that after the marriage, she will cease to exist. In the sense, she will totally lose her identity, and she will lose her control over herself. So to test him, she bakes a woman-shaped cake and offers it to him. Just like herself, she bakes a cake, woman-shaped cake, and wears a red dress to the cake. And she taunts him by saying that this is what he really wants. This is what you really want. Just eat it. And he is disturbed, and when he leaves, she eats it herself. So the cake is presented to him, and he is also abusing him, saying that this is what you want, just eat it. So you just want to consume me. So instead of consuming this cake, consume this cake, because I just identify myself with the cake. So this is what is a statement. And he is disturbed, and when he leaves, he doesn't want to eat the cake, and he leaves. Therefore, she eats it herself in a very vigorous manner. It seems that she has identified herself. She has been thinking that she has lost her identity, and now she has realized that he is not intended to eat the cake. Therefore, the cake stands for her, and he is not willing to consume her. Therefore, she has started consuming herself. In the sense, she has regained her control over herself. So the next morning, Duncan shows up at her apartment, and Marian returns to telling the story in the first person. She offers him the rest of the cake, which he accepts and enjoys. He eats the entire thing. So Duncan comes to her home, and she tells the whole story, and finally asks him to eat the cake, and he, without any expression, eats the cake and says it's good. So he eats the entire thing. So this is all about the story of the edible woman. So if you keenly look at the story, you will come to know that the society has nothing to do with it, but it is more about a personal choice. How the psychological dilemma that the protagonist faces is resolved at the end of the story, and the eating disorder represents her great unwillingness to proceed through life as a passive example of ideal femininity. So from a passive woman to an active decision maker, and a passive traditional woman to an active modern woman, and a passive example of ideal femininity to an active example of enlightened femininity. So with this note, I just wind up this session, and in the next session, on the 20th episode, we will analyze in the gender perspective. Thank you. Thank you.